Hey guys, so what was that? Hey guys, so crazy thing happened. Another month has passed. It's November somehow, but it was October. Hence the Fall Out Boy Halloween shirt. It says, I don't have the guts to keep it together. Sick so much for Stardust reference. I think it's really funny. They put these shirts on sale for 2 days on their website, and then they didn't get delivered until Halloween. So I couldn't even wear it for Halloween season, but October wrap up. Perfect time to wear the jack-o'-lantern shirt. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about all of the books that I read in October today. October was not my best reading month. I read a lot of books. I read 10 books, but not all of them were bangers. I had one new favorite, I reread an old favorite, and then I feel like I had like 4 not great books, 4 that I enjoyed. So I don't know, it was kind of hit and miss, but I did read a lot, so we love that. If you're new here, hello, my name is Cass, and I talk about books here, mostly literary fiction, essay collections, and memoirs. So if that's your thing, you should definitely stick around, leave a comment. If you've read any of these books that I'm going to talk about, let's discuss, give me your thoughts, and yeah. We are going to jump into it with my Storygraph stats for the month. So like I said, I read 10 books, coming out to 1,799 pages. They were 70% fiction and 30% nonfiction. 6 of them were books that I owned. 2 were from NetGalley, 1 was an Everand ebook, and 1 was from the library. And we're just gonna rip the band-aid off. We're gonna talk about the major literary event of the fall, and that is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was a 5-star read for me, but I have found my experience with Sally Rooney to be that every time I read one of her books, I enjoy it more than the previous book. So I started out with Normal People back in 2021, and I was like, wow, great, 5 stars, love it. Then I read Beautiful World, Where Are You in 2022, and I was like, also great, love it, also 5 stars. Then I read Conversations with Friends later on in 2022, and it was the same thing. I also loved that one and was like, this is even better. So gave that 5 stars, and now I've read Intermezzo and I gave it 5 stars. This is a very hyped book, so I will be interested in like the coming years whenever people kind of get over the hype and go back and revisit this and see if all of the rave reviews still hold up, because I will be honest with you, I do think that part of my positive feelings towards this book are partly because of like, it's just such an event and it's so exciting to have a new book from the Sally Rooney. So I feel like that kind of skews the viewpoint of this, but I did really enjoy this. I think another reason why my enjoyment of this book was heightened was because I went into it kind of skeptical. I really was not sure if the storyline of this book was going to appeal to me as much as her previous books did. I ended up getting swept up in this book. It's over 450 pages, and I read it in 6 days, which for someone like me who reads a lot of really short books, I think that that's a really fast pace. And I was just so excited to pick this up and dive back into the story every time I had a chance to read. So the storyline here is a little bit of a departure for Rooney. I feel like it's not as much of a difference as people were kind of making it out to be at first, but we follow 2 brothers, Ivan and Peter, and their father has recently passed away, so we're seeing them deal with the aftermath of that with their grief. The other really big part of the story, though, in classic Rooney fashion, is the romantic entanglements that the brothers are involved in. I thought that there was a lot of really great heart-wrenching writing about life and love, and Rooney also explores class and religion and power dynamics within relationships. So there's a lot going on here, but there are a lot of elements that I think are going to appeal to fans of her previous books. I personally really enjoyed the way that she portrayed the family relationships in this book, particularly the bond between Ivan and Peter. It was complicated, it was strained at times, but overall I think it was done really beautifully. There are also a lot of different layers to the romantic situations in this book. I think that Rooney does that with a lot of nuance. She really captures the different feelings and the different angles of all of the characters that are involved. I think the biggest difference in this book is not in its storyline, but in the writing style. Rooney is switching between Peter and Ivan's point of view, and with Peter's point of view, we see her try out this more clipped and fragmentary style of writing. It did kind of throw me off at first. I believe that the book opens with Peter's point of view, and I was like, what are we doing here, Sally? Like, it really did kind of take me a second to get into that style, but for me, once I got into it, it didn't bother me. I feel like it was a really effective way of demonstrating Peter's mental state throughout the events in this book. Ivan's chapters are more in that classic Rooney prose, and yeah, I really enjoyed the way that she used the different styles. I think that it showed the differences between the two brothers and just kind of gave each of them a bit more personality. I know that the writing style with Peter did not work for everybody. I've seen a lot of people talking about how they did not enjoy that, couldn't get into it, but for me, I didn't mind it. Maybe I'm in the minority here, I don't know. Overall, I feel like this definitely is a more mature work from Rooney, but I don't think that it's too big of a departure where it's going to alienate fans of her previous books. This felt like a complex and truly fleshed out novel with a capital N to me. I really got lost in it and really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad that I picked it up and am continuing to follow Rooney's career. The next two books that I read in October were both by Deborah Levy. We had The Position of Spoons, which is her newest book that was published by FSG on October 1st. Shout out to them for the copy on NetGalley. I rated that one 3.5 stars. And the other one by Deborah Levy was Billy and Girl, which I rated 3 stars. I did an entire video on her work and talking about my thoughts on all of her books, so I'm gonna try and keep this short. The Position of Spoons is I guess essay collection would be the best name for it. It's made up of a lot of really short pieces of writing. A lot of them are about authors and books that Deborah has read and enjoyed. A lot of them are about art, and there are also some more personal pieces. I talk a bit more in my author spotlight video about which pieces were my favorite in here, but overall I felt like the pieces on writing and some of the more personal pieces were really the standouts for me. I think my number one complaint issue with this collection was that I wish that it was a little bit more curated and organized. I was watching a Nathan's Nook video today. I think it was his August wrap up. You guys, I'm trying to get through my watch later playlist. I have so many videos in there that I need to catch up on. But he was talking about a Margaret Atwood poetry collection that spanned from like the 1960s up until present day. It was like a huge chunky thing, talked about so many different subjects, and he was talking about how he felt like poetry collections should be a bit more curated, kind of follow a theme and just not be so broad. And I kind of think that I can apply that line of thinking to this collection, even though this collection was shorter than the Atwood. I think that this one's only like 200 pages or so. I wish that it had been split up by topic, or that some of the pieces had been cut from the book. And then with Billy and Girl, this is an early, I don't know if it's a novel or a novella, but it's pretty short as well. This was a really strange book. I feel like the voice was a little bit different here. There were a lot of like very quirky choices that were made in the writing of this. which does kind of make sense because the book is following two kids, Billy and Girl, on their quest to find their mother. We've got supermarkets, kidnappings, robberies, lots of talk about pain and memory, lots of themes about family, which that part kind of reminded me of August Blue, another one of her novels. August Blue felt really sparse to me, but Billy and Girl felt colorful and almost a bit abrasive to me. It was kind of the opposite of August Blue. It was a fun read, but sometimes it just felt like a little bit too much. So yeah, I don't really know about this one. It was an interesting experience for sure. Next, I read Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. This was a 4-star read for me, and fun fact, this is one of the very first books that I had added to my TBR shelf on Goodreads, like years and years and years ago. I got a copy of it for Christmas last year from one of my friends, and I continued to put it off even though I had received the copy of it. I don't know why. I just felt like maybe my tastes would have changed and maybe I wouldn't enjoy it. I ended up doing this as a buddy read with Amelia, who has an Instagram account that I'll link below. And I personally was really surprised by how honest and complex this was and by how much I enjoyed it. It's one of the most intense explorations of a mother-daughter relationship that I have read personally. The narrator of the book is observing the decline of her mother's memory. She shows us the way that their lives are intertwined with each other. We get a lot of their history and the things that they went through together in the past. It's a really interesting dynamic because they've survived so much together and that has brought them very close. But there's also this vein of like bitterness and jealousy that runs between them that really complicates things. The past really complicates the way that the narrator is dealing with her mother's mental decline. She's kind of questioning how she should be cared for, whether or not she should move in with the narrator and her husband. And it's kind of a sticky situation because they really do just like bring out the worst in each other. I found that the writing style here was very straightforward and to the point, and that always works for me. A lot of the writing about memory loss also felt poignant and accurate to me. There's also this sense of unreliability, which adds some intrigue. The narrator is questioning whether or not her mother is purposely forgetting things in order to kind of try and rewrite the past. This isn't a like happy story. I feel like enjoyable is not the right word for it, but I'm really glad that I read it. I think that it does a great job at doing what it set out to do, which is exploring motherhood and memory. I've also read a lot of the like Goodreads reviews for this, and a lot of people thought that this book was like really gross and they did not like that. I didn't think that this book was any more offensive than like an Otessa Moshfegh. Like if you've read Lapvona, you'll be fine with this. I don't know. I feel like people were really up in arms over some of the like bodily functions and like gross things that are mentioned, but I kind of think that they were overreacting. So yeah, I'm really glad that I checked this one off of my list. I'm excited to see what this author does in the future. Okay, if we want to talk about gross things in writing, I have a quote from the next book that I read, which is Saving Agnes by Rachel Cusk. You guys, I had to like put this book down for a moment whenever I read this. Like nothing in Burnt Sugar made me feel as icky as this part of Saving Agnes did, okay? Like skip ahead maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds if you don't want to hear. There is a passage in this book that says, once when she had fallen over and cut her knee, he had watched her pick off the scab and had taken the I can't even read it, and had taken the crusty flap of skin from her hand. Agnes, who had thought she was removing the hideous excrescence unobserved, cried out in protest and shame. To her horror and later wonderment, he held it up in the air for a moment and then put it in his mouth. Oh, I literally, I can't deal with that. I don't know what Rachel was thinking when she wrote that scene. Anyways, the next book that I read in October was Saving Agnes by Rachel Cusk. I rated this one 3 stars. This probably is my least favorite Rachel Cusk novel so far. I do still have a couple more that I need to complete, but this is her debut novel, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading it. I talk about this in my Rachel Cusk author spotlight video, but it's so interesting to me to see how much her writing has changed from the start of her career up until now with the release of Parade this summer. I thought that the writing in this felt a little bit too effortful and embellished. It felt like she was trying very hard here. And that's not to say that an author shouldn't try with their writing, but there was just a little bit too much going on here. I feel like she got a little bit thesaurus happy, and she just pulled some words out that, like, it could have been simplified a little bit, I think. It's in such contrast to the really sparse writing in Parade. So yeah, I don't remember with her other earlier works that I've read having too much of an issue with the prose like that. So I don't know if it was just kind of like a debut thing or what, but yeah, just a little bit overwritten for my taste as a reader personally. As far as the story goes here, I feel like this fits in so perfectly with the kind of depressed woman moving genre that we see so often in contemporary literature. Agnes, our main character, is in her 20s. She's living in this rundown flat with her friends. She's working a job that she feels might be kind of a dead end that she really dreads going to. She's grappling with religion and family relationships, and she is kind of hung up on a past relationship. She's waiting for her new fling to call her. So it's just a lot of quintessential, like, woman in her 20s subject matter, I feel. Overall, you really just get this sense that Agnes has spent her entire life wishing that she could be someone else. And I thought that some parts of that were relatable, but in general, just kind of fell a little bit flat for me. So yeah, I would say this is for the cusk completionists. Don't start here. I don't think that it is super indicative of her current or even her past writing style. I feel like she's changed a lot since this book. My next read was a NetGalley arc. Verso approved me to read Set My Heart on Fire by Izumi Suzuki, which was translated from the Japanese, and it is releasing on November 12th. This was a 3-star read for me. I read it in the car on my 10-hour drive from Pittsburgh to Nashville. It was a quick read. I think it's about 200 or so pages. So I was able to finish the majority of it on that trip, but I don't know if I would recommend reading it like that. I think it might be best to spread it out over a couple days. So I've been intrigued by Izumi Suzuki's work for a little while. She has, I think, 2 short story collections that have been translated to English so far, but I'm not a big short story person, and I think that they kind of verge a little bit like sci-fi adjacent. So that kind of put me off as well, but I've seen her books around and I wanted to know what was up. So I figured with this novel being translated in English, this would be a good place to start. And I just thought that this book was fine. Like I said, it was quick, and I did think that some of the later parts of the story were pretty compelling, but overall I wasn't super blown away by it. This is another girl in her 20s trying to figure life out kind of story. We follow Izumi, who is drifting through the music scene in Japan, and this is set in the 1970s. I do believe that it is kind of loosely based off of the author's life. I think it is a bit autofictional based on some of the reviews that I was reading. So Izumi kind of goes through life in a drug-induced haze. She's hopping from lover to lover, all these different musicians. Eventually she marries one, which doesn't go well. I found that the beginning of the book, when she was going from relationship to relationship, that kind of fell flat for me. It got really repetitive and I had trouble keeping straight like who was who. Once she does get married, I think that the story takes a little bit more of a troubling turn, which sucks for her, but I thought that it was more compelling to read. There's a lot of darkness and abuse in the marriage in this book that it kind of reminded me of If Only by Vigdis Hjorth, which I really did not like that book. But I think that the thing that kind of set my heart on fire for me was that it was shorter. My main complaint with If Only was that it was so long and so repetitive, but Izumi Suzuki kind of kept this more focused and less repetitious. Like I said earlier, I always appreciate like a really straightforward, sharp writing style. This book had that. I enjoyed that. It was quick, and I'm glad that I have tried this author. I'm not sure that I'll continue with like reading her short stories that have already been released or not, but thank you again to Verso and NetGalley for the copy. The next book that I finished, I actually read on my way home from Nashville back to Pittsburgh, and I'm happy to say that I had a much better time with this one, and that is Writing into the Wound by Roxane Gay. This was a 4-star read for me. I read this on Scribd. I think that it's like a Scribd original thing. I don't know what they do. It's also now called Everand. It's not called Scribd anymore. But this was a really short, like 40-page long, kind of like extended essay, which love. This is the first time that I've ever read Roxane Gay, and I thought that this was such an interesting exploration into the nuances of writing about trauma. I am someone that loves to hear writers talking about their process, and in this little essay thing, Roxane takes a look back at how her writing has evolved throughout time in order to process the traumatic events that she's gone through. She talks about how she would kind of write around that traumatic situation, and eventually she was able to write about it directly. It was super reflective, and it was really harrowing because she talks in this book about how the publishing industry kind of has re-traumatized her with the release of her books and like the press coverage that they've gotten. The media has treated her really terribly based on her race and her size, and she explores that in here, and it was really upsetting to read about that. I haven't yet read any other books by Roxane, but I do think that this seemed kind of like a really great overview into one of the main threads that runs through the rest of her books. I feel like she's a writer that has always kind of been on my radar, but I just have not gotten around to her yet, and I feel way more inclined now to pick up one of her like actual like longer works. It seems like she has a really great perspective and ability to connect the personal with the bigger picture. And yeah, I think that if you're a fan of memoirs specifically, this would be a really great short read to kind of accompany maybe some other writing about trauma. And then we have my one library read of the month. That is Dreamwork by Mary Oliver. This was another 4-star read for me. I have talked about it a little bit previously. I'm not really a poetry person. Not that I dislike it or anything. It's just not something that I'm super familiar with. And I I think I had seen a couple TikToks that use the sound of her reading the poem Wild Geese, and like I've seen her poems on Pinterest and stuff like that, and I was like, you know what, like I'm just gonna get it out of the library and give it a shot, try something new. I feel like this was a really nice place to start with poetry for someone that really hasn't read much of it. Mary Oliver is obviously really skilled in writing about nature. There's a lot of that in here, but there are also some like really hard-hitting lines about just like being a human being and trying to find your way in the world. This isn't going to be a super long review because I don't feel like I have really any like intelligent thoughts about this. I just know that I enjoyed it. I read a lot of this book sitting on the porch of the Airbnb that we had in Nashville, and it was like very pleasant. And yeah, I don't know, it was a nice experience. My favorite poems in here were Wild Geese, The Journey, and One or Two Things. My second to last book for this month was Sula by Toni Morrison. This was a reread, so I do have a reading blog about it where I kind of go deep into my thoughts on it. This was a 5-star read initially for me whenever I read it back in 2022. I struggled a little bit more with this book during my reread of it, but I am keeping my rating at 5 stars because I don't think that my struggles were due to the book itself. I think it was just me being busy and just kind of unfocused. I think that I would have had a tough time reading like any book that I had picked up in the time that I read this one. So Sula is the story of 2 girls growing up in the town of Medallion, Ohio in the 1920s. We have Sula Peace and Nell Wright. They have this really intense friendship that spans from their childhood to their young adulthood. And once they kind of become adults, their relationship is full of betrayal and just really complicated feelings. Morrison does a really great job of kind of building the world of Medallion, Ohio. We get a lot of family history for both of the girls, and she just really kind of fleshes out the town. This is one of those books where I feel like there's just nothing that compares to reading it the first time around. I think one of the things that kind of kept me from fully getting engrossed in this was that I already knew what was coming in some situations, and so I wasn't as like eager to get to them, I guess. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I feel like my first read of this, I was like, oh my god, like what is going on? I need to know, and it just made me so desperate to fly through this. I think Morrison's writing style is really wonderful. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that Toni Morrison is a talented writer. We all know this already, but I find that her writing is descriptive and evocative without doing too much. I think she knows when to make the language a bit more flowery, and she also knows when to use some restraint and pull back, and she kind of has this bluntness that she brings into some scenes that really make them hit even harder. There are certain scenes that have been etched into my brain since my first read through of this, so it was really interesting to return to those scenes now and kind of see what Morrison was doing, see how she was putting the pieces into place. There's also an introduction that was written by Morrison herself that I thought was really insightful because she talks a little bit about the writing process and where she was in her life at the time of writing this book. And as always, I love to hear an author talk about those kind of things, so I feel like she really kind of pointed out some themes and things to keep in mind while reading this that I found to be very helpful. I still stand by this being a must-read book, but like I said, I think your first read through of this, like, no rereads will ever compare to that, and I would recommend that you pick it up when you're ready to kind of get swept up in a story, because I feel like this is very much a whirlwind of a book. We've made it to the last book of October, and that is A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. This was sent to me by Hogarth, and I believe that it published, Google was saying, on September 17th. So it's out already. You can go and buy it. I rated this 4 stars. This really did take me by surprise. I am not someone that typically in the past has enjoyed short story collections, and I'm not really someone that reads horror. Once again, it's kind of like the poetry thing. It's not that I don't like it, it's just something that I don't really read. Like, I'll watch horror movies from time to time. I have some friends that are really into them, so like we'll watch them together, but it's just not something that I tend to dabble in on my own. With short stories, I just really tend to have a hard time getting invested in pieces of fiction that are so brief. However, Mariana Enriquez somehow combined these 2 elements to make a book that ended up really working for me, which I was really happy about. I chose this to read in the last couple days of October, since it's kind of scary, I felt like it was fitting, and I wasn't sure if it was gonna be a book for me, but it was. I think that she really found like a sweet spot in the length with these. They are long enough where you kind of get to know the characters and the setting and the like supernatural scary elements that are going on, so you can get invested, but they're not so long and drawn out that you get tired of them. I feel like she just really found like a good length where it's not too short, it's not too long, it's just right. The other reason why I think that these worked for me was because Mariana Enriquez, I don't think that she's being freaky for the sake of being freaky. I think that she was being freaky with intention. And I feel like that's probably something that a lot of horror writers do, but since I don't read it very often, it really stood out to me here. She connects these scary, weird, supernatural elements to real life horrors like rape and addiction and poverty and all of these things. There's a very strong connection between the supernatural and the real world. I liked that each story kind of felt like it had a point to make. It was saying something about the state of the world. I think if she was just being like weird and violent and gory just for the sake of it, like that would not have worked as well for me, but I like that there was kind of a lesson to be learned in each of these. So yeah, I feel like these stories were just so unsettling, so perfect for this time of year. It was also really cool. She's an Argentinian author, so she does bring in a lot of Argentinian culture and some like folklore, which was really interesting to read about. I think that this was a really great kind of change of pace for me. I feel like it kind of reset my brain in a way. It was just different in the content, in the form from what I usually read, but it was still literary and well written. So I just feel like it was such a good mix of elements, and I'm really glad that I picked it up. My favorite stories in here were Different Colors Made of Tears, Face of Disgrace, The Suffering Woman, and The Refrigerator Cemetery. So that is it. Those are all of the books that I read in October. Let me know what you guys have been reading. Let me know your thoughts on the books that I read, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!